Hi, welcome. Welcome to the Intuitknit podcast. My name's Lori, your host. Today is February the 26th, 2016, and I'm coming to you from a city just north of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Today is a cold winter, icy day, but the sun's out, so that always makes everyone feel cheerful, doesn't it? Yeah, so my camera has been wreaking havoc on my podcasting today. I have tried probably 6 times to do this recording, so I'm hoping for the best this time. It could have been that my camera wasn't fully charged, but it seemed to have enough charge to complete a recording, so I'm surprised. But anyway, what I was thinking of doing was to put things that I wanted to put at the end of the podcast at the beginning, and vice versa, just so that I don't miss anything. And I may end up just uploading this video, because if I don't do it that way, it probably will never get done. So, yeah, I was going to tell you also that we have a Ravelry group, and it's just called the Intuitknit podcast. So please check us out, because we would love to see you, and we would love to see the things that you're working on. So today, what I'm going to start with, as I said before, were some things that I was going to include at the end of the podcast. Now, since I've already mentioned that we have a Ravelry group, what I wanted to tell you was that we are going to have a KAL coming up, and it's going to be called the Knitting Bee KAL. The reason being that spring is coming. Even though we have snowflakes dropping today, usually by the end of February you can tell that the light is changing, and because Easter is early this year, it just makes me think that spring is on its way. So maybe that's the hopeful part of me, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And of course, when springtime comes, the first thing I think about are flowers popping up. This year I planted a lot of crocuses in my garden, and I'm thinking about the critters that are going to be coming to some of the flowers that make their entrance early in spring. And because I am interested in beekeeping, I wanted to share with you my craft. I know this is a knitting podcast, but I thought this would be kind of an interesting theme if we wanted to do a knit-along related to bees. So part of what I've been doing in the past week or so has been to create some prizes for our knit-along. Now, the knit-along, I was thinking what I'd like to propose is that people who'd like to enter would join our Intuitknit podcast, and they could post pictures of projects that they've made that could be related to the subject of bees. So those projects could be objects in the color of honey, for example. You could make some yellow and black striped objects. You could make things that relate to the flowers that bees like to visit. So if you look up the website where they describe friendly flowers for bees, that would be a good thing to include in a project. You could do an object that has a honeycomb stitch, for example. So anything really, and I'm not going to be policing the entries in the sense that I won't be disqualifying anybody. You could even have an object that you've shrunk and call it "Honey, I shrank this project." So we just want to have fun, and I was going to offer a couple of prizes as part of that KAL. So I'll just show you what I've come up with so far. So this week I've been doing some sewing. I know I was supposed to be making my nightgown that I showed you last week, but instead I've been making some other projects. So I made these project bags, and you can see the bee design on those projects, not project bag. And in the inside, I've got some flowers. So this would be about the size that you might want to use for a shawl, or even a couple of pairs of socks. So that's a fairly large bag, and it's got a little holder here as well. So that's one of the prizes. And then I've got this other project bag that has obviously got some hives on it, and some cats waiting for those bees to come out of the hive. And it's also got a little carrying case. And in the inside, it has some nice sunny yellow fabric, so kind of the color of honey. So yeah, I just thought that would be lots of fun to do. Now, if you've been watching my thread, or not my thread, my YouTube videos, you're going to see that last week what I did was I made some hand-dipped beeswax candles. And it's something I've been liking to do for a while, so I thought that I would include some of those candles as part of the prize. So I'll just show you what those look like. And so these are the candles that I've been hand dipping this last, well, actually a couple of nights ago. And if you want to find out how I did these, you can go on to my YouTube channel and see how I've done them in my kitchen. It's a long, slow process, but if you enjoy that sort of methodical, repetitive thing, you might like to do the process. Plus, they have a wonderful scent, and so your home will smell like that when you're finished your candles. So they tend to burn quite well, and I've heard that they're a lot healthier than paraffin candles if you decide to light them. So we'll be doing the candles, the project bag. I'll be including some yarn, of which I haven't got that yet, but it probably will be something that is honey colored. So it'll probably be something in this kind of colorway. And then I'm going to give you some spring flowers to plant in your garden to hopefully coax some bees to your garden. One of the reasons that I feel that we need to support the bees is because they're in a crisis right now, and we really need to do some thinking about how we can support their viability for agriculture, and just, for so many things that we rely on as food sources. So yeah, I just thought I would relate my love of knitting to my interest in supporting the bees, and so I hope that you enjoy that, KAL. So please come to the Ravelry Intuitknit podcast group, and please do post your entry or your photograph of a project that you might have completed. It doesn't have to be large. It could be even a small toy. But I'd really love to see some of the things that you come up with. So that's great. So what's on my needles? Well, last time I did see you, what I was working on was a shawl out of some of my hand spun, and I think I showed you that before. This is just 2-ply hand spun, and I've probably worked my way through half of it, and the shawl is getting bigger. And this is a shawl that I'm just sort of making up as I go along. It's no particular pattern that I've used, except I'm imagining all different stitch patterns that I might like to incorporate, and so I'm including them in my shawl here. So you do see some yarn overs, and size needles are size 4mm needles. Yeah, so I'm enjoying that. There's a mixture of teal color as well as like a green tweed color. I'm not sure if it's coming up on this light right now, but yeah, so I'm quite enjoying it. I find shawls are quite a great project to use if you really just want to do some mindless knitting, and because the final result doesn't have any expectation. Many times if you're using a shawl, you can't really see what the design is as it's wrapped around you anyway. It's just a lot of fun to do. So I'm really enjoying that. It's very soft, and that's one of the things that I've been working on. One of the other things I've been working on is a pair of socks, and I usually visit my local yarn store for sock yarn, but when I was going through a department store locally here, I saw this beautiful colorway of yarn. It was just red heart yarn. But when I looked at it a little closer, I saw that it was actually a good proportion of it is wool. So I got a couple of balls of it. It's 73% wool, 27% nylon. And this yarn is quite thin, and it has a very soft kind of texture to it when it's knit up. So I thought you'd enjoy seeing some of the colors that are in there. When you look at it, you maybe don't see right away that there's actually a bit of mauve in there too. And I was going to pick up on that color and maybe make some toes of that color and my afterthought heel that I have made a waist yarn for. So I know that first glance you kind of think of brown as being the color choice for the heel and toe, but actually I'm going to do something unexpected and maybe make that mauve color as the colorway. So those are being knit on 2.25 double pointed needles. They're quite short. These are probably 5 inches long, and they're quite slippery, these needles. I'm not sure of the type. Could they be knit crow? I'm not sure. And so on this yarn, you have to be watchful because the yarn itself is quite slippery. I'm using actually 4 double pointed needles for the sock. I kind of tend to use those 4 of them. I was noticing Danny on Little Bobbin's Knits podcast, she was talking about how she uses 3, and I guess everybody has their own preference. I started on 3, but I kind of just like the way that the 4 will just flatten down when you're trying to store them in your project bag. Yeah, so that was kind of fun. And the next thing I was working on and continuing to work on was this Nermi Lintu shawl. I haven't made a lot of progress on it, I will say, but I'm just up to the point now where I'll be starting the lace panels. And it's a beautiful mauve color. And I was considering using ginger kind of colorway to put the lace panels in, but I kind of am leaning towards just keeping the purple going. One of the interesting things about this project is that I'm using something that I picked up at a thrift store, which were pairs of these needles called swallow needles. And on first glance, they look a little bit like they might be plastic, and they look a bit variegated like that. But when I was looking them up online, what I found was that they are made in Australia, and what they're made of is like a milk protein. So the thing I'm noticing about these needles is that they're very light to the touch, and lately I've been struggling with a little bit of arthritis, as you can see in my hands. So I find these quite relaxing and quite warm to use. So I was wondering, I hadn't heard of anybody else on a podcast talking about these needles, but if you have been using them, or if you know a little bit more about them, I'd love to know where I could get some more. I've never really seen them in Canada, but maybe they are more in an Australian yarn source or yarn supply source, so I'm not sure. But yeah, those are very nice. Quite enjoying that. I just wanted to show you, and I forgot to bring it over, another pair of socks that I'm working on, so just one second here. I'm not yeah. So last time I think I spoke to you that I had done some yarn dyeing, over dyeing some of the Regia sock yarn. And the way that I did this was I just took some Cushing's dye and made solution portions out of that dye. And then I put the wet dye in a mordant of vinegar and put the oven on at about 225 or so. And then just sprinkled parts of those solutions on top of the wet yarn and put it in the oven for, I think, about an hour and a half until the dye bath was clear. And so what I came up with then was a yarn that was quite nicely variegated here. So I'm making a pair of socks, and if you've been watching me on Instagram, you'll see that I've been struggling over this Fish Slips Kiss heel. I say struggling because I think part of it was the fact that I was trying to learn a new stitch technique that's in the pattern, and I was trying to use darker colored needles. These are Knit Picks wooden needles, but as you'll see, that they're almost the color of the yarn that I'm trying to use. So I think that's where I was running into problems. Had I used a lighter color needle, I probably wouldn't have been struggling so much. It's a pattern that's available for $1 by the Sock Therapist, and if you watch the Grocery Girls podcast, you'll see that they are giving away 50 of those patterns to people that enter on a thread on their podcast group. So if you'd like to try this pattern, go to the Grocery Girls podcast group on Ravelry, and you'll have an opportunity to win a pattern. And this pattern is only $1, so even if you didn't do that, that would be a good investment to learn this technique. With my aging brain, I have a little trouble memorizing the stitches, but I'm thinking by the time I get to the other sock and maybe try it again on another sock, it's going to be a little bit easier for me. So many people rave about that sock heel pattern that it is very appealing because it's such a quick pattern to follow, and so I would like to try to put my best effort into doing that. So those are knit on 2.5 millimeter needles, and I quite like these Knit Picks wooden needles. They're quite soft in my hands as well, so you might want to try those if you haven't. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say about these was that I think I might do an unexpected toe color just to liven it up a little bit. I did the fuchsia pink for the cuff, but what I might end up doing is using an alternate color for the toe just to make it a little bit unusual. Or I could try maybe an orange color. These balls of yarn are a Norwegian yarn, and Sandnes Norway is the type of yarn it is, and it's called Sisu. So it's just a nice sock yarn that I have used in other sock projects before, and so I could use that for the toe. The other thought was that maybe I would put a blue toe as well on that, and for this one I was maybe considering using Seldridge Farm Soft Touch Ultra wool. This is a yarn local to me, and it's from Seldridge Farm in Ontario, Canada. So that's what that is. And the colorway is called Bluebell. Yeah, so that was in my stash. I may consider doing the toes out of that. The other thing that I wanted to show you was that I've been spinning up the fleece that I had purchased at the Rhinebeck Sheep and Wool Festival last year. And this is a 2-ply that I'm making. And I had communicated, I watched a podcast by Emily of Fibertown podcast. And she's such a beautiful spinner. I've learned a lot just listening to her podcasts over the years because she has such a broad knowledge of spinning and the different breeds and how they're best spun up and that sort of thing. I love watching her. But it made me mindful of the fact that in the yarn that I'm making of this Finn sheep that I did purchase at the Rhinebeck Sheep and Wool Festival, that some of the breeds that have like a long staple length might be best spun up in a woolen technique of a long draw woolen method of spinning. So I may try that technique. I have a lot to learn about perfecting it, especially at this point since I've only been doing a short draw technique on my spinning, but I would like to try it just to see if I could get more lofty yarn as a result. So this is turning out quite well. It's a nice brown color, and I may actually coordinate this color in a final project because I was thinking of making a sweater out of that yarn, and trying to find now the yarn that I was considering using. I've got some yarn in my handmade project bag, as you've probably seen before, of my own creation. And this is some fiber that I spun up from a place called Wellington Fiber. It's a place in Ontario that makes mohair yarn, and they have their own farm, and I've been there before. And they sell some beautiful fibers as well as already created yarn. And so what I might do is incorporate the red into some color work, maybe with one other color, to do some color work maybe in the yoke of a sweater when I finally get enough of this done. I have used the Wellington fiber before because I had made this mohair shawl a couple of years ago out of, I think it was like 3 skeins of the Wellington fiber mohair. And you know, it's interesting. Years ago, they used to have more commonly used mohair sweaters. That used to be all the rage. I think in the 70s, that was popular to have a mohair sweater. And at that point, I remember it being very, scratchy. But actually, I find this shawl is quite comfortable, and it's quite soft. So, yeah, it's something I quite enjoy wearing with a shawl pin and that sort of thing. Now I am doing a little bit of spinning to try to recreate the yarn that I've been using on this sweater that I showed you last time. And so it's like a grass green color that I had spun up. And I'm making a sweater just kind of intuitively. I created a steek for the front, and I may put a zipper in, or I may put a button band in. We'll see. But there's quite a variation of color there. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to recreate a 2-ply yarn, sort of thick and thin, because that was the nature of this yarn. And what I'll be doing is trying to make enough yarn to complete the sweater. I've got part of the sleeves done, and I'll just be working up into the yoke area as it goes along. So I haven't made a lot of progress on spinning that yarn, but I'm hoping to do that. So this is a fairly short podcast, but one thing I wanted to share with you too was this find that I had. I sometimes do go to auctions, and my sister lives in an area called Port Hope, which is very historic. We used to go to a lot of antique shops there, and they would have regular auctions of different things. And at the time, I was always looking for things that were knitting related. So they have recently not hosted those auctions anymore, but it's kind of sad because you often would find things that were quite unique. And one of the things that I found when I was attending an auction there were these lovely knitting needles. And these knitting needles were made and hand-carved by someone who lives in Quebec. I tried to research online who that might be, what the name of the person was, but I haven't been able to actually find out who makes these lovely knitting needles with the tips the way they are. But I just thought you'd enjoy seeing these. They're a man and a woman. And yeah, they're quite unique. Now, they're actually wooden knitting needles, and one was a little bit rough to use, so I had taken some beeswax and tried to smooth it out a little bit. But I haven't actually used them for a project just yet. So yeah, I just thought that you'd enjoy seeing that. So week in review. Well, I've been watching a lot of podcasts, and I think I'd mentioned the podcasts for Fibertown. That's a really enjoyable one to watch, as well as the Grocery Girls. Those are two of my favorite recent podcasts. And also watching very often. I'll try to watch Deesa's Craftwork podcast. Those are really interesting podcasts because she's coming from Sweden, and she has her dog Mira, and she'll go for walks in the forest, and just listening to her talk about how she likes to make her projects. She tends to create objects of her own design as well, and so I quite enjoy listening to her. She's very sweet. So I hope that you have a very good week, and hopefully this will not pose any problems for me to upload this video. And please come and visit our group on Ravelry, the Intuitknit podcast, because we would sure love to hear what you have to say and some of the projects that you're making. So I'll be back in another couple of weeks, and I hope you have a really good winter week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.